Just want to say welcome. Welcome to everyone. Hello from Austin. We are so grateful you all are here today. TPA is so grateful to be able to offer these webinar series, and we are super grateful that our TPA president, Dr. Carrie Lavelle, is here with us today. Um, Dr. Lavelle is a licensed psychologist working out of Grapevine, and she provides professional consultation, custom wellness programs for small businesses, and clinical supervision. I'm going to let her do a little further introduction, but again, welcome everyone, and thank you, Dr. Lavelle, for presenting today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here with everybody. Um, I am going to be your captain today. We're going to go on a journey together. And so, I will say that I think it's already going to be the kind of day. I don't know where the little yellow marks came from, so we're going to move through technology together. Together. I cannot see all of you, and since this is being recorded, I do want to respect your privacy and encourage I
I think it muted, so sorry. Another technology blurb to get
Nope,
us
that's
started.
okay. There we
Thank you.
go.
Our system muted.
Um so because we're being recorded and I want to respect your privacy in the event that you may not want to share verbally or anything like that, I will encourage you to use reactions. I can see those and it gives me a sense of if something is landing, if you have a question or things like that. And then my hope is that by the end of our time together today, we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. So today we're going to be talking about ethical drift, and navigating the ethical current and maintaining the human element amidst that. Okay. And so let's think about it this way. A ship rarely runs aground from one wrong turn. Aground, meaning it gets leveled up on something. I looked that up as I was making sure that my metaphor was going to be as accurate as possible as a non-boating person in the world. Okay. More often, is it one wrong turn that leads, a boat into being a shipwreck? It's more often it slowly drifts off course. And that's exactly how ethical drift is going to be happening the same way for us. Most ethical problems in psychology don't begin with egregious acts of misconduct. They begin typically with really the best of intentions. A clinician wants to be responsive to a struggling client. A psychologist wants to make documentation more efficient for herself or her team. A practitioner wants telehealth to be accessible and convenient. None of these motivations are unethical. Yet, ethical drift often begins precisely there in reasonable decisions that are repeated often enough that they become our new normal. So, our focus today is not on dramatic ethical violations, it is on recognizing those subtle currents and warning buoys that influence our practice every day. Okay. Using a nautical metaphor, because if you know me at all, and by the end of this time together today, you will know me better. I love a good metaphor. So today we're going to be thinking of ourselves as navigators. Technology has changed the waters in which we practice. And so the question is not whether or not we should use digital tools. We absolutely should. The question is, how do we stay on course while using them? So by the end of today, and in our 1 hour together, 53 minutes at this point, my hope is that you'll be able to identify the currents that our boats are sailing in, recognize the signs of drift, and leave with some practical navigation strategies or refreshed or polished up the strategies you probably already have for maintaining your own ethical fidelity in modern psychology practice. Okay. I don't know how to get those yellow lines off. Do y'all see yellow lines? Again,
Yeah, that is so strange. I have no idea. That's not what
welcome.
we practice, Gary. I'm sorry.
That's not what we practice, but you know what? Sometimes things drift. So, yet again, there we are, right? So, I do want to put out my disclaimers and conflicts of interest out there to you today. I did receive an honorarium from TPA for this presentation, equivalent to a conference registration. My leadership role with TPA has absolutely no influence on the content of this presentation. I'm just willing to raise my hand or heed a call of requests. So this isn't about me representing anything about TPA as a whole or a larger organization. I come to you as an independent professional today. And in the spirit of the transparency that our ethics in this program that it advocates for, I want to name my own use of technology. I use generative AI tools to support the preparation of this presentation today, exploring language, understanding boating metaphors and how that can fit for our time together, and creating some visual elements. I did not use AI to generate clinical recommendations or to substitute for my own professional judgment in providing this to you today. And no confidential or client identifying information was entered into any AI platform for the purpose of this program today. I remain fully responsible for the content. What I hoped to move through with you today is these things that I'm sure captured your full attention to come on this sailing journey with me today. I want to clarify that I am not going to be teaching you how to be ethical in these digital waters, nor is this program about ethics with specific types of technology. I assure you I am not that well versed. But just like ethics in your graduate training program, rarely is it 100% clear. Now, perhaps having a sexual relationship with your client, that one's pretty clear, but we're not talking about that. Technology is changing way too fast to keep up with it in a random 1 hour program like this. So my goal is to refresh, polish up that nice anchor you already possess, that you learned early on, maybe an anchor or a compass. We'll find out together today. Bringing that ethical mindset into this current jet stream of digital waters. Okay. So let's keep moving. I want to remind you that I come to you as a human being today. Before I go any farther, I am not the expert in this. I do the best I can. And so there are some things I know very well. There are others that, despite my best efforts, I probably don't know maybe as much as y'all do about some of these technologies that create currents in our waters. But I am making the best decisions I can in the gray space of clarity, and that's what we are all striving to do as psychologists in the gray space of ethics. So I come to you today, human to human, with some special knowledge, some special preparations in this boat theme, and I am bringing my humanness to you as you bring yours into the space to really take away all the juice from today's squeeze. Okay. Let's keep moving and get going as we leave the harbor today. We are going to set our intentions on understanding what exactly we're talking about in terms of this concept of ethical drift. Okay. Ethical drift is the gradual, often unconscious movement away from established ethical standards and professional boundaries. In a December 2025 online journal article from JAMA, no, the American Board of Professional Psychology, JAMA's later, they discussed this concept of ethical fading, which is a parallel construct to ethical drift, in which psychologists unconsciously lose ethical awareness and integrity over time without intentional self-reflection and the consistent practice of ethical vigilance. So, taken a step further, ethical drift can involve awareness of potential or existing ethical issues and a psychologist rationalizing to justify their deviations from some acceptable standard of conduct. Today, we're using the term ethical drift to refer to all of it. The unconscious and the gradual distance from intentional ethical decision making that accumulates through absent-mindedness, active or inactive cognitive processes, even defense strategies, professional isolation, and even needing to take care of our own self-interest, and many other seemingly reasonable rationales. Notice that the definition of ethical drift contains two important ideas. First, it is gradual. Second, it is often unconscious. Most psychologists don't wake up in the morning and decide to practice unethically. And if you do, I would be surprised if you self-selected to attend with us today. Instead, small adaptations accumulate. One exception becomes a pattern. A shortcut becomes standard procedure. It functions on lack of awareness. A boundary softens repeatedly until it becomes difficult to identify where it originally stood. Okay. Most ethical violations don't begin with bad intentions. That's where we started just a few minutes ago. They begin with good intentions. And like a ship moving 1 degree off course, the movement is nearly imperceptible. Yet over time, small shifts create significant distance from our intended destination. I think about ways I may find myself adrift. Sometimes catching up on admin while a webinar is playing in the background. Cough, cough. How does that drift us away from intentionality and self-reflection? Pay no attention. I cannot see you, so I am not calling anybody forward in that. But it is if you are here, perhaps in that same of I'm going to have that playing while I do some admin work, just know that that may be that 1 degree off course because you're listening, but you're not reflecting. And so, and consider that an invitation or do with that what you will. But I think those can be good reminders that I was thinking of that when I was doing this, which means I've done it too. Okay. So as a non-boating person, I enjoy boats. I don't know much about sailing or other than enjoying the water and the sights and sounds and all that good stuff. But when I saw this, when I was preparing for this, I came across this picture and the title of it is Analog Practice in a Digital World. And I was like, well, that has to go into the presentation, right? And you can reflect, show hands, do a reaction, however you please. But I wonder if anybody else can relate to this picture. Maybe you're a sailor and you know that this is just standard procedure, or like me, you kind of feel like the woman in the orange um, uh, uh, cloth on her head, and she's got her life vest on, and she looks a little stressed. And I definitely relate to her in that moment. And so analog practice in a digital world. So let's think a little bit more about how the digital ocean has changed. Okay. When many of us were trained, and I'm assuming this as we go through, because I can't see you and I don't know who's all here, I will, I see a hand raised, and how about we come back to questions at the end, and just to make sure that we have time to get through the content and then we can have discussion. So many of us were trained psychological practice was structured around a physical office. Clients came to us, communication was relatively contained. The beginning and end of therapy was marked by a waiting room, a door, and an appointment time. Today, we practice within an ocean of constant connectivity. And in some ways, that happened without our consent. A pandemic happened, we had to adjust, and here we are. That storm of COVID-19 forced this shift, initially for safety and wellness, and now for relevance and continuing to work for our living. Our offices extend into living rooms, sometimes bathrooms, cars, airports, dorm rooms, parking lots. Clients can reach us at any hour through portals, email. I'll say text, but if anybody has ever been to one of Dr. Michael Flynn's programs on how to not get sued, hopefully you're not texting. But these scheduling applications and increasingly through platforms that blur the boundaries that are very traditional to how many of us were trained. At the same time, we're being introduced to AI-powered documentation, automated reminder systems, and digital clinical support tools. Instead of these distractions being because somebody is mowing outside of your therapy room, you see your client being distracted by the scene outside of their parked car. And there's little that we can do to control or manage that. Instead of worrying about our office being soundproofed enough, we're figuring out ways to talk to our clients to ensure that they're connecting to the correct Bluetooth for privacy reasons. Instead of working to keep a client emotionally in the present in a critical moment of self-disclosure, we're holding our breath that our computer or internet doesn't buffer in that moment. And if hopefully you're like nodding your head or giggling that, yes, it's funny or it's relatable because it's real and shared. The answer is not to avoid using technology at all. This maintains a connotation that psychology is tired, unevolved, and at times irrelevant. Each innovation offers incredible benefits, and every current that helps move the ship forward can also alter its course. Today's challenge is to determine where those currents are, or maybe just knowing that they're there and naming some of them and that they're pulling us, and really to strengthen that navigation system to keep pace. Okay. So hopefully y'all can relate to some of these things. All right, so that takes us, we're going to do a poll question for those of you who are not passively with us, but actively with us. The poll question is, which digital currents or digital current pulls psychologists most strongly? These are anonymous. You're invited to participate. In item number one. Okay, we've got some answers coming in. Which digital current pulls psychologists most strongly? Convenience, accessibility, efficiency, documentation burden, fear of disappointing clients. Okay, awesome. If both questions came up for you, feel free to answer the second one. We'll get to it later. And so it looks like we've got 78% of people answered the first question, so we're going to go ahead and talk about it. And then we'll come back to these questions. So thank you for engaging that. From looking up from your paperwork and engaging us in this way. I say that with fun and love. This is my telltale sign. Okay, so here's the thing. It looks like many people choose convenience, that they think that convenience, 42% of our crew today thinks convenience is the digital current that pulls psychologists most strongly. I don't know that I would disagree with that. I think I would relate to that. I think convenience and efficiency are kind of two sides of the same coin. Because here's the thing, in true psychologist and ethical fashion, there isn't a wrong answer here, nor is there a single right answer. None of these things are ethical violations. They're all reasonable professional pressures. Ethical drift begins when we stop noticing how strongly these currents are steering the ship. This question is particularly powerful because it gets us reflecting on ourselves immediately of what do we think is the most important current pulling us, rather than thinking about other clinicians or the field, those other people over there. Gets us thinking about us. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these currents. Okay. Current number one, convenience. Technology is designed to reduce friction. It's one of its greatest strengths. Scheduling is easier. Communication is faster. Documentation can be more efficient. Records are instantly and more easily accessible when we need them or when we need to share them. Instant scheduling, templates, one-click communication, AI-generated documents. But psychology has historically relied upon deliberate reflection. It's one of the things that makes psychology unique in the healthcare fields. And it's also one of the things that can get us in some trouble. We think a lot. Good clinical judgment is often slower than technology. The danger isn't convenience itself. The danger occurs when convenience quietly replaces intentionality. For example, when we begin documenting what is easiest rather than what is clinically most relevant, and stopping to really think about what needs to go in our note for ethical reasons and even for continuity of care reasons. Or when we communicate with our clients because we can, rather than because it serves treatment goals. A question that can hold us accountable to steering the ship or allowing the current to steer us is, did I choose this behavior or this action because it is clinically indicated or because it's easier? We have all done things on both sides of that, but that can help us stay closer to maintaining control of our ship and not drifting with that current. Convenience is not unethical, but convenience can create pressure toward efficiency, and efficiency can gradually replace intentionality. Another powerful current involves accessibility and availability. One unintended consequence of digital communication is the expectation of immediacy. Research shows consistently that digital communication changes expectations regarding responsiveness and availability. And we can see that in our younger generations who feel the need to respond to texts immediately. That those same generations are receiving services and have expectations for us, but are also becoming therapists themselves. Portal messages, again, texting. If you're texting with clients, talk to Dr. Michael Flynn. He'll give you some guidance there. Email, appointment requests, so much avenue for communication. Patient portals didn't just improve HIPAA compliance. In the long run, some of you may already be aware it created more work, whether you feel that or you know that. Historically, clients left a voicemail and expected a return call in maybe 24 business hours. But today, clients send portal messages at 10 a.m. and wonder why there hasn't been a response by 10:15. There was a study published in JAMA in June of this year that explored patient communication patterns on the medical side of the house since 2020. Online portal messages sent to providers jumped 153% between 2020 and 2025, and phone calls decreased by 6%. This proliferation in direct messaging platforms in healthcare was a function of the pandemic and efforts to reduce in-person interactions. They may have existed before, but really their use amplified in 2020. But there hasn't been a corresponding drop-off in clinic visits. Rather, this technology is adding to clinicians' workload rather than replacing in-person care. This is parallel to psychology. How many of you have had a patient cancel their appointment, but reach out via electronic means of communication about something that should have been discussed in the session that they canceled? Instead of scheduling, folks are messaging. And parallel to medical care, this isn't reimbursable or always therapeutic to their therapy goals. Let's consider this though. The expectation isn't necessarily unreasonable from their perspective. It reflects the broader culture in which we live. Ultimately, the accessibility is a current that can drift us from healthier boundaries in patient communication. The challenge is that clinical responsiveness and availability are not the same thing. In fact, they might sometimes be in conflict. Professional boundaries create safety, predictability, and sustainability for us. Without those boundaries, clinicians often experience fatigue, resentment, or burnout. If you're on any social media, there's always a therapist of some sort talking about burnout, especially their own burnout, while they're in PJs creating professional content at night. Concierge medical clinics complicate this for us as well. People may have similar expectations for us that they may have for the different kinds of providers they may have. In our nautical framework, think about the difference between a lighthouse and a Coast Guard speedboat. A lighthouse is dependable because it constantly maintains its position. If it chased every ship that approached the coast, it would cease functioning as a lighthouse. The more we reflect on serving as a lighthouse to our clients, the better able we are to set and reset expectations with them so that we're maintaining to be that lighthouse and less like the speedboat or a 24-hour call center. Okay, the third of many currents that we could talk about, is the idea of reduced presence or that interpersonal, the atmosphere that is created in an office that's lost in any written communication. And there's some research that supports that screen-mediated communication changes interpersonal perception and interaction for the client too. It fundamentally changes how humans experience one another. We know that telehealth is effective, so this isn't about that at all. It's just about understanding and really reflecting and refreshing some of those things that we may have done early in the post-pandemic world to think about how we may or may not be doing those as much now. There was a 2022 survey that found that 17% of patients believe that the quality of virtually delivered therapy suffered because of emotional and physical detachment. And 25% found that their therapist was rushed and lacked patience. When I read that, I thought, I could see how the digital environment may create less space for us, holding space for their pace. So that's not an accusation. It's just bringing it to our attention because it's relevant. Patients receive in that same survey, patients receiving virtual care reported missing the shared physical space with their therapist, and that this lack of in vivo interaction may decrease the level and quality of nonverbal communication. I think we all know that. And some patients reported experiencing less freedom to express themselves when they are not in the same space as their therapist. I found that really interesting too, that we all may feel somewhat inhibited by the virtual space and how our personhood may come through. Other contextual factors abound. It can be exponentially more difficult to engage healing-oriented therapy when a client is meeting with you from the same environment that caused the damage. I have found that to be a barrier in a lot of virtual care. As psychologists, we know how much information lives in subtle observations, body posture, transitions to and from the therapy space, eye contact, physical appearance, informal interactions before and after session. Research supports that the clients experience these reduced aspects of the therapeutic relationship too. The on and off switch of the session versus that transitional walk to and from the office. A client's blurred background that prevents full understanding of their environments. We can't see what's going on whenever they have a background on, and maybe that's important data for us. This doesn't mean telehealth is inferior, and statistics know that. Help us to know that. It means that the therapeutic frame requires greater intentionality, one that we may drift away from naturally because now this is no longer new. It's old hat. Well, maybe that old hat needs a little dusting. When the natural structure decreases, ethical awareness must increase. And as navigators, we may lose some landmarks. Therefore, we need to remind ourselves of our instruments. So let's explore those challenges below the water. Hidden reefs beneath the surface. In ship navigation, I learned that reefs are major hazards that create shallow waters to be avoided by staying on the mapped course. Reefs are not visible from the ship and are undetectable prior to eye contact, prior to contacting them under the water. A ship drifting into a reef can risk damage to the ship, maybe that's your reputation, danger to the crew, that could be considered your license, and devastation to marine life and coral formation, and that may be client well-being. And so let's explore one of many reefs, but one that we'll talk about today is boundary erosion. And let's consider that through a case example. A newer in-person client sends a summary of their takeaways from session via portal message following a session that was particularly emotionally evocative. They demonstrate insight and congruence with the therapeutic intentions of that session. You feel relieved to know that you're on the same page and reassured in your work by the client's reflection and vulnerability. You provide a quick note of acknowledgement and support. This kind of message becomes a pattern, and you receive frequent journal reflections between sessions and after sessions. At first, you acknowledged receipt, then you offered encouragement, then you begin processing themes or reminding them of that metaphor that you used in session, and that may or may not be me that I'm speaking about. Soon, you're finding that that therapeutic work has migrated out of the session. Nothing happened suddenly. The shift occurred through a sequence of entirely understandable decisions. And that's what makes boundaries difficult. Most boundary issues emerge from care, not indifference. And so the questions that you ask yourself become, at what point did treatment move outside the agreed upon therapeutic frame? And what impact does that have on treatment structure, informed consent, compensation, and clinical expectations? And it's through conversations like this that get us thinking, how do we regroup? How do we disengage that way to go or thumbs up or that acknowledgement of something that maybe really warrants no acknowledgement? This is a good reminder to take care that those reefs will always be under the surface. Another reef under the surface is professionalism. And this one is interesting. Again, thinking about my own process and bringing my own vulnerability to the space with you today, I'll share another example. Many digital spaces encourage informality. Text or emails or portal message maybe are more brief, emails more conversational. Platforms are designed to feel more personal without maybe the work that goes into building that rapport. Over time, this environment may subtly influence professional identity. Language becomes more casual. Expectations become less defined. Exceptions become more routine. As roles multiply and you become both therapist and tech troubleshooter at the expense of other ways time may be spent in session. I don't know if any of you have experienced that. You may find yourself relying on an increased sense of self-disclosure to connect or delivery of interventions through self-disclosure since so much interpersonal context is lost in that telehealth space. You may notice that your communication style becomes more social than clinical or more slang versus psychoeducational. You notice that clients and even yourself aren't presenting as if you would for an in-person appointment. I think we can all appreciate that business on the top and cozy and comfortable on the bottom. Nothing is wrong with that. But how might that impact that drift? Maybe you notice that your client is vaping in session, tentatively at first, and then when you don't say anything because you're processing what's happening, their vaping becomes a third party in the room or the virtual space. Or worse, you're vaping absentmindedly. Vaping isn't the problem. The question is, if this occurred in my physical office, what would be different? And that question often reveals changes that we have stopped noticing. Okay. Another hidden reef beneath the surface is judgment. Technology affects it. Psychologists are increasingly encountering AI-assisted documentation tools, automated suggestions, even when you don't want it, templates, predictive algorithms, workflow automations. These tools can be so helpful. However, research on automation bias shows us that humans tend to place excessive confidence in technological output. This is true in AI selected images in forensics. Podcasts talk about how people are wrongfully accused all the time because of AI identified their photo compared to a very grainy photo on a security camera. In psychology, we are also subject to that bias. Clinical judgment is not merely data processing. It includes nuance, context, interpersonal understanding, cultural factors, case conceptualization. Technology should support clinical reasoning, not replace it. Our scientific foundations depend upon maintaining active engagement in the interpretive process. The navigator may use instruments, but the instruments do not command the ship. So let's discuss a little bit more about what can happen when the instruments become in command.
De-skilling hypothesis. In 2026, Nature published a feature article examining a growing concern among researchers. The concern wasn't that AI was making humans stupid, the concern was something called de-skilling. The idea is that skills improve through use, and skills weaken through disuse. Pilots who rely too heavily on autopilot can lose aspects of manual flying proficiency. Doctors who become over-reliant on diagnostic software may lose certain diagnostic skills. Research suggests that heavy reliance on GPS can reduce the use of navigational skills and may affect the brain systems involved in spatial navigation. The same principle may apply to cognitive skills. So if AI routinely performs tasks that previously required memory, reasoning, writing, or problem solving, what happens to those skills over time?
I'm hoping that de-skilling is something that y'all have heard of before. And what we know is that de-skilling, there's evidence of de-skilling across specialties in medicine, which is terrifying. And that has been true for a long time, even with the onset of more robotic oriented, I don't know the correct term for that, but robotic oriented surgeries and those kinds of things. So de-skilling has been a concept for a long time, but the more that machines take place of our minds, um, it is a risk of losing what we all worked so hard to get or are working so hard to get it for those of you who may still be studying to become a psychologist. Okay. All right, so let's explore some more about those warning buoys. And I saw in the chat, okay, we're just gonna keep going with our yellow signs, our yellow markings. But I saw in the chat that there may be a solution. In the future, I will know. So early warning signs of ethical drift. Ethical drift is often easier to prevent than reverse, which means recognizing warning signs early is the best way to avoid hitting the reefs. Now, this is in no way an exhaustive list. What I hope that you consider doing is thinking about what are some of your own internal signs and sharing those in the chat with your team, the team of people here to learn about this together today. Notice that just like for most of our clients, earliest indicators of something that needs attention are going to be emotional rather than behavioral. A sense of discomfort or something doesn't feel right. Maybe some rationalizing to make it make sense just this once. This pressure or sense of obligation that client needs me or is depending on me. Maybe even resentment towards clients and their needs, towards colleagues and their needs, towards you and your own needs, right? Those things can certainly show up. Some behavioral signs can occur as well. Expanded availability, including after hours communication, documentation shortcuts. Copy from previous is an excellent tool in a lot of our EHRs, but how are we using that to improve our practice, not become our practice, right? Or our practice of documentation. Boundary inconsistency. This is a really interesting idea because we may not apply the same boundaries to everybody. And then though increasing that reliance on automated tools, looking for faster, not necessarily better solutions. There are also some organizational red flags I don't have on the slide, but I want to talk about lacking tech policies. Does your organization have one about how you or the agency might be using AI to communicate rules for using that, or even having it included in practice policies for the clients to read? If there's no clear documentation standards for messaging, discussions, guidance, or support for how to ethically use AI, I appreciate that that kind of makes us all sailing by ourselves. If you're a practice owner, a supervisor, or part of a consultation group, how are you modeling anti-siloing approaches and open exploration about the ethical use of AI? I think these are all ways that we can keep ourselves talking and learning from one another. So that's where our next poll question comes up, and it may already still be up on your screen, and some folks have answered it already. But let's do a self-audit exercise. Which of these statements is familiar to you? There may be more than one familiar to you. There is not a right answer. Select all that apply. It's an anonymous reporting. Statements like, it'll only take a minute, just this once. The client could really benefit from this, or they really need this. This is what everybody else is doing. It's just easier to do it this way. Nothing bad has happened so far. I'll revisit that boundary later. I'll figure that out later. Is this really therapy? Am I doing therapy? Oh, I don't need to document that. The software is sufficient. Okay. So if you will, let us know in the poll question, if you haven't already answered it, which one applies to you, or which multiple can you identify in your thinking patterns in your work? Okay. I really love this exercise, if nothing else, just looking at it right now and making a mental note to yourself, because almost everyone recognizes themselves somewhere on this list, if not in multiple items. The goal is to help us recognize that ethical drift often begins with internal justifications before it becomes visible behavior. Okay. As psychologists, we're trained to recognize cognitive distortions in our clients, and we spend less time discussing the subtle rationalizations that appear in our own professional thinking. So that's what I'm serving as your Captain Aaron Beck doing that here today. Okay. Perhaps a client sends a quick portal message, hopefully not a text, and you respond. Then there's another question, then something else, then a quick little tidbit. No individual response feels significant. Yet over time, the cumulative act can fundamentally alter treatment expectations. 1 minute is rarely the issue. Repeated 1 minute exceptions are. Think about how many 1 minute tasks occupy your clinical day or your clinical week. What expectations are those interactions creating? Just this once.
I just want to puke.
This may be the most common drift statement in professional practice. Just this once I'll meet after hours. Just this once I'll use my personal phone. Just this once I'll respond immediately. Okay, I think you know where I'm going with that. Okay, let's keep going. There are no correct answers here. There are no wrong answers here. The purpose of this exercise is for your own awareness. These statements are not evidence of unethical practice. They're evidence of human psychology. They're the stories we tell ourselves when a current begins pulling us away from our original position. Ethical drift is rarely caused by ignorance of ethics. We know the rules as psychologists. You're here today. You know the rules. You need a few hours of CEUs and ethics for your license renewal. More often, it arises from the gradual normalization of these small departures from our intended course. The value of a self-audit like this is that it helps us to notice the current before we have drifted too far. The good news is that navigators don't need to eliminate every current. We simply need to recognize when a current is moving us farther away from our destination. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for awareness. Okay. So we recalibrate to true north and we think about what our tools are. If we're surrounded by others doing the same, as some of the things that we're identifying today may not be the course that we want to be on or stay on, we're less likely to notice our own drift. And so in our nautical metaphor, our ethical principles serve as our true north. Technology changes, platforms change, public health crises change, documentation changes and software changes, telehealth and technology regulations evolve. The things that should remain stable are the foundational values of psychology: beneficence, non-malfeasance, integrity, fidelity, competence, scientific responsibility. These values orient us when circumstances become unclear. If technology represents the current, these principles remain the compass. And there are other ethical guidelines that are, not just our state, but our national governing body offers us. Ethical guidance in AI in the professional practice of psychology. If you haven't already, check those out, look them up. Make sure that you know what they are. What's interesting is this is the only ethical guidance on the APA website that has an infographic that was easy to copy and paste in a presentation, which is very apropos for it being a technology focused guide. Okay. So for us, true north is our ethics code, and our magnetic north is where ethics drift. Okay. All right. So let's discuss some navigation tools. Technology may assist the work, but it cannot become the clinician. And this slide is really the heart of our presentation today. What can be delegated? What can be automated? And what must remain distinctly human? Psychology is fundamentally a relational science. Interestingly enough, a quote from the creator of the first chatbot, Eliza, in 1976 said, "No other organism, and certainly no computer, can be made to confront genuine human problems in human terms." Finding that in preparation for this was a really cool full circle moment. It was never intended to replace humans. Okay. So we've covered our ethical compass, and if you haven't looked at those APA guidelines in a while, check them out. Let's think about our human element and protect that. That is our job security. We know from various articles how humans have bore the cost of removing the human element in using AI for therapy services. I'm not going to go into that today, but we know that there is a lot of risk there. It is also job security for us. And so let's explore some of these navigation questions. As psychology evolves, preserving these human functions becomes that much more important. The human element isn't what remains after technology. The human element is what gives technology its ethical direction. Not just the developers, but how we use it. That informs how people continue to create it to replace us. When facing complex digital decisions, I encourage clinicians to use a simple framework. So let's look at some of these questions. Would I make this decision in person? Would I document it without hesitation? Would I encourage a trainee to consult about this? For any supervisors in the space, you know that you are telling your supervisees pristine guidance, but may not always be following it yourselves. If you would tell a trainee to do it, that's a good reminder about how to stay on the course. Is this guided by evidence or convenience? Does this strengthen or weaken the therapeutic frame? Does this help a client reach or not reach their goals? And then my personal favorite that I think about probably more than I should is, what would pre-COVID me say? For those of you who didn't practice before COVID, I understand that that may not apply to you, but for many of us for whom it does apply, I think that that can be a really good way to recourse our navigation. And so let's think about a cute little framework here that is basically PCA: pause, check your compass, adjust your course. The pause is critical because technology encourages immediacy. Checking your compass means asking, what do the ethics say? What does evidence suggest? What do consultation and professional standards indicate? You bring your question to your consultation group and everybody supports you through guiding and steering your ship in the right direction. Ships use dedicated marine communications to ensure safe passage. They coordinate movements, avoid collisions, and receive vital weather and hazard alerts using standard radio and digital systems. If consultation is our digital communication system, if we're not consulting with other human elements regularly and outside of any specific issue, then by default, we are already adrift. So after we check our compass, then we make intentional adjustments. The framework is simple, but it creates a moment of reflection that prevents against automatic drift. Okay. None of these questions, these navigation questions here alone determines the answer. Together, however, they may offer you clarity about whether you're remaining aligned with professional values or drifting, like our pal over here, from Pirates of the Caribbean. I was like, do I really want that person reflecting our ethics, or is he representing our drift? That's for you to decide. Jack Sparrow, there we go. Okay, so let me go through an example and then we will return to Harbor and we can have a little bit of engagement. So example 1, a psychologist agrees to see a client virtually while the client is traveling. The next session occurs from a hotel, then an airport, then another state. Eventually, neither the therapist nor the client routinely verifies location before sessions. One hallmark of ethical drift is that familiarity reduces vigilance. The better we know a client, the less likely we are to perform routine safety checks because we've come to believe we already know the answer. So RP, pause, helps us identify the automatic behavior. In this case, the clinician may not be making a conscious decision to ignore the location. Instead, the question has simply disappeared from the routine. Drift often occurs when important practices become unconsciously omitted. Before beginning the session, slow down. Ask, do I actually know where this client is today? Am I relying on information from previous sessions? If an emergency occurred right now, could I send help to them? Have I replaced verification with assumption? Then we're going to check our compass. The compass shifts our focus away from convenience and back towards professional obligations. A location check is not merely administrative, it is a clinical safety procedure. Consider the relevant ethical principles. Can I adequately respond to a crisis if I don't know the client's location? Am I minimizing foreseeable risk because of how well I think I know this person? Am I following established telehealth standards? Am I maintaining competence in digital service delivery? What responsibilities accompany providing telehealth services? Could I fulfill those responsibilities if an emergency occurred? Am I practicing consistently with my stated policies and informed consent procedures? And then we adjust course. Most clients respond positively when they understand the procedure is based on safety rather than bureaucracy. The goal is not compliance for compliance's sake. The goal is maintaining appropriate standard of care. Okay. If we have time, we have a couple more examples, but let's keep going. And let's return to harbor. Returning to the harbor of our clinical practice. And as we conclude, I'd invite you to remember one central idea. Ethical drift is not evidence of poor character or unethical behavior. It is an occupational risk within a rapidly changing sea of clinical practice. Technology will continue to evolve, as will our clients, and the practice of psychology will hopefully continue to evolve as we all stay relevant in medical care today and tomorrow and next year. Our task is not to resist every technological advance. Our task is to ensure that innovation remains guided by the human element, by ethics, by science, and intentional clinical judgment. A ship does not stay on course because the sea is calm. It stays on course because the navigator continues checking the compass. And let's make this a little bit more specific to us as navigators here. Experienced navigators don't stop checking their position simply because the sea has been calm. Calm waters are often when drift goes unnoticed the most. So with that being said, there are some references here for you, and I'm happy to explore any questions, any comments that you have. Happy to share with you at this point, but I appreciate all of your attention and your commitment to yourselves and your ethical practice and showing up today. Any thoughts?
If you want to unmute and ask a question, you're welcome to.
All right. Risk is always in play. Yes.
I put a note in chat about beefing up my consent form to protect myself more from technological shallow water or reefs.
I love that you're using the language. It's fun to think about it this way. It makes it a little less, I think, intimidating in some ways. So I'm glad to hear that. And I will share. Creating programs like this helps. It always helps make sure my own boat is on course, right? And so earlier last week, I added some things to my practice policies as well as it relates to this. So always a good thing to keep these things in mind. Thank you for sharing.
I see Dr. Scholl has his hand up.
Yes.
Hi, Carrie. Just wanted to know if you had in your references whatever is the latest APA guidance with regard to digital aspects of practice.
I did a little in one of the slides, there was a photo of the infographic from APA on their guidance in using AI in clinical practice. And so that I don't remember exactly what the date is on that, but I know that that is within the past year. And so if you
Okay,
go to the APA website, you'll be able to find all of their, ethics guidances there for sure. And so that one is going to be the newest. I know that
okay.
they update them regularly. So
Yep.
thanks for bringing that in, just so that everybody knows where to find those things with APA.
Thanks. Thanks, Carrie.
You're welcome. Um, in terms of recommended specific trainings for current telehealth practices, that's a great question. I do not have any specific to suggest. What I would say is anyone that you watch, y'all, it's so easy to do it passively. If you're going to watch a telehealth program, watch it and really, even if it's reassuring that you're doing everything you need to do, yay, you got some reassurance. But if you're needing more, like tips or strategies, that may be a good source for consultation and maybe paying for like a one-on-one tutoring session to ensure that you're well within the frame and the course that you want to be on. But that's a great question, and I don't have any specific recs other than maybe APA or those governing bodies like that.
Okay,
Can I mention just one more thing?
Sure.
Um, Several of us, I'm sure many people attending today, have an ongoing, participate in an ongoing consultation group with some trusted colleagues. It is priceless, just priceless. I've had one for like 10 years with 3 other colleagues. Priceless. I recommend it to everybody.
Thank you so much, Paul. I similarly, I've been part of one since October of 2020, and it has evolved and changed, and it is wonderful. And it is like the vulnerability I even bring with you today is like nobody's super comfortable doing that with people who have maybe far more time in the field or an experience than I may have. But having a consultation group says, but you know what, we're going to learn about this together. And that vulnerability helps us remember how hard it is to be a client, to do good work, and the way that we practice. I think it's undersold. And so what I will say, while it is not current registration, I don't believe is currently open. TPA has been seeking to provide support for helping people to find consultation groups. So if you're hearing what Paul's sharing and what I'm sharing, it may be something that you consider next time registration opens up, that may be a way that you find a crew to have that space to just talk about the business of practice, the challenges of being a human in this field. So anyway, yes, thank you. Consultation groups cannot be recommended enough. Okay. Allison, thank you. She shared her email for folks wanting to get in touch with her about CEU providers for telehealth. All right, well, it is 1 o'clock. I would love to spend more time with you, but I want to respect all of your time. Thank you for being here. Go forth and prosper. If you have any questions or other comments, feel free to look me up on Connected Community. Send me a quick note. I'd love to hear from you. And I love talking metaphor or any other things related to psychology. So more than y'all take good care. Be well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lavelle.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.